Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining this class. The title is called California Balcony Law. I'm Dilip Khatri, and I organized this course to provide information for real estate agents, for HOA organizations, general contractors, and homeowners who or condo owners who have balconies that have to comply with this law. I'm a registered structural engineer, a registered professional engineer in the state of California and 48 other states. I'm also a licensed general contractor for 30 years, and I'm pleased to present this class to you. The objectives of this course are to, first of all, understand there are two regulations. There's an SB 721, which pertains to multifamily apartment and condominium buildings. There's also SB 326 that was passed in 2020 that focuses on homeowner associations. And we're going to be focusing primarily on SB 326, although the technical information actually is applicable to both laws. There are some nuances between the two regulations that distinguish. For example, for HOAs, the inspection cycle is 9 years. For apartment building, it's every 6 years. But the important thing to know is that on item 3 here, that there is a mandatory requirement to complete the repairs within 180 days. And I'm actually required under both laws to report anything that I find that's damaged to the local building authority. There are 3 phases, phase 1, 2, and 3. Phase 1 is the initial inspection, which we will come out and do a visual inspection with some tests. I'll get into those tests, and we'll try to determine, without having to rip up any balconies, whether or not we have any issues. And there are specific non-destructive tests that I will explain. If we do find issues, well, first of all, if we don't find issues, then we'll issue a letter, a report, which will release the inspection for that particular balcony, basically pronouncing it as being safe for sound use. If we find issues, then we have to go to phase 2, which is to prepare a design plan, obtain permits in order to reconstruct that balcony. And phase 3 is the implementation of the repair permit. So the class is offered free on the internet for the public, so anyone can take this class. It's posted on YouTube. For those of you that are real estate agents or property managers and you're seeking DRE credit for the class, it is approved for 1 hour of professional development hours as continuing education. Contact my assistant, Jessica Perez. Her email is up there on the screen. She'll send you a registration form. There is a fee of $25, and you just have to pass an exam. It's a pretty straightforward exam with 70% correct, and you can use your notes. After you pass the test, return the test. After you take the test, return the test to Jessica. She'll score it. And if you pass with 7 out of 10 or higher, then she'll give you a certificate for the professional development hour. So your time's not wasted. Those of you that are in the industry, real estate agents, property managers, the class qualifies for 1 hour professional development hour. The overview on this class is we want to, number one, understand what a balcony is. We want to understand how its structure works together. And then I want to explain to you what the causes of structural distress are. They could be summarized into items 4, 5, and 6, which are termite damage, water damage, and structural overload. Railings are also part of the balcony law, so we need to evaluate the railings. The railings are required to meet certain code requirements. And then we will touch upon some solutions, repairing solutions and construction costs, and the design and permit phase, so that you can understand how to stage your project. So railings are part of the rules, the scope of the law, and so that includes all these stairways which have to be checked. You can see on the right-hand side of the slide. we want to be able to show that the railings can withstand, they have to be able to withstand a 100-pound horizontal force applied in the horizontal direction. That has to be proven, and that particularly applicable if you see up on the top left slide, the family there up against the railing. And there is an exclusion in the balcony law for concrete balconies, but wood balconies are the major intent. That's the main focus of the balcony law. Well, the definition of what's called a balcony or an elevated deck by code is anything that's 30 inches above the ground. The balcony law, written by the state of California, is using the definition of 6 feet, which is somewhat in conflict with what the code requires, because the code's definition of an elevated deck is 30 inches, but the balcony law says 6 feet. I stick with the 30 inches because that's the code that I have to adhere to. The handrail has to be minimum 42 inches high. The ballasts have to be no more than 4 inches apart. That's essentially the distance from one rail to the next rail so that kids can't squeeze through there. And there are cantilevered balconies. There are balconies with columns, which can be called an elevated deck. There's reinforced concrete balconies. Those are excluded. Steel balconies are excluded. So the focus of the law is primarily on wood balconies, because wood balconies seem to have the biggest problem with deterioration and failure. So the technical evaluation of balconies and stairways, SB 326, was passed with the intent to obviously curtail, eliminate future balcony failures, because there were some people who unfortunately died on balconies. UC Berkeley, I think, was the main case that brought this issue to the forefront, and then so did, I think there was also a failure in San Diego. So what causes these failures? Well, the main thing is long-term deterioration. They are very, very substantially overloaded. I've seen a lot of that as I look at cases around the state. Termite damage, definitely a major cause, which from water causes dry rot and just age. You know, balconies, wood doesn't do too well once you pass a certain number of years if it's not maintained, if it's not protected, if it's not waterproofed, if you don't take care of it, it's going to age, it's going to eventually come apart. So one key thing to draw from this first paragraph is that each balcony unit is mutually exclusive of the rest of the building lot. In other words, you can't really say that if we have 100 balconies at a building, that if we inspect 10 of them, that we can conclude that the other 90 are going to be similar. I take a different position on this perhaps than other engineers. The balcony law does allow for sample size, but remember that when I issue a report for your project, I'm taking liability for all of the 100 balconies. So we've come up with a system that can check all of the balconies on a project at a fairly cost-effective rate and be able to give you a report for each particular balcony. And the reason that that's the case is because certain balconies may be higher prone to failure because of several factors. One is exposure to excessive water. Maybe some balcony owners are putting potted plants on their balconies and other balcony owners are not. And if you don't inspect the ones with the plants as well as the ones that are not, you're not going to get the full spectrum of damage or no damage. Some owners overload their balconies. They put heavy loads. I've seen them with refrigerators, air conditioning units. I've seen even balconies that are being used as living space, and they're not designed for that. So you could theoretically take a 100-unit project, a 100 balcony project, and you could inspect, say, 20 of those or 15 of those, and you could selectively choose. I'm not saying that people would do this, but you could choose the balconies that are not overloaded and don't have potted plants and make a conclusion that they're all good. And that's where you get into a dangerous situation, because if you ignore the balconies that have these problems, then you're ignoring the problem. And termite damage. You know, some areas of a building are more prone to termite damage for whatever reason. It's subject to water leakage. Maybe the roof gutters aren't working. There's all kinds of reasons that could be happening. And so that's why all the balconies need to be inspected. exposure to wind forces. Some areas of like in Santa Monica, if the balcony's on the west facing elevation, which face the ocean, they see a lot more wind, a lot more salt water than, say, the eastern exposure. So again, each balcony is mutually exclusive. And then, of course, the last bullet point, existing roof drainage can damage the balcony joists as well. So you have to think of the project as each balcony is a separate structure, independent of the other structures. They are all tied together to the same building, but they are not, you cannot really make a sample size conclusion from that. So when we come, or whoever you hire, but at least in our office, when we come to do the evaluation, we will use this instrument, which is called a zip level. It's essentially a level survey, and this is just an illustration. And what we're doing is we are measuring elevations on that balcony to see if it is tilting, is it sinking, is it deflecting, and I have a short video clip which will show how we do that and what that means exactly. And we will do some destructive testing if necessary, depending on what the results are of the zip level survey. This is a slide from an actual project. You can see the termite damage is quite extensive, and you can see the condition of these connections, which are just about ready to fall apart, because you can see once the wood deteriorates to a certain point, that one bolt is going to have nothing to hang on to, and it's going to fail. So in this particular project, we had to recommend that these balconies had to be completely torn out and replaced. And then, of course, the use of thermal imaging. Thermal imaging is very powerful. This is just a sample shot. We use this in our office. We have the instrumentation to look for variations in temperature, which will tell us where possible water is collected, where there may be a leak occurring. It's also used to determine heat loss for purposes of insulation, but it's a very powerful tool to search for leaks and drainage failures. And these are non-destructive methods. The zip level survey and the use of thermal imaging are very powerful tools that allow us to evaluate not just balcony structures, but all kinds of structures for potential issues. So when we come out to look at a balcony, what are we looking at? Well, we're checking the connection of the railing. We're looking at the support beams, the balcony joists. We're checking all of these bolts. This is a cantilevered balcony. Although it has an end supporting beam out here, it is cantilevered. And every balcony is different. They're not all the same. There's some pretty innovative and creative ways to build a balcony. But the railing is just important as the deck, because if you're leaning on this railing and it can't withstand the forces, then that could cause a fatality. And so that same balcony, as you start to examine it a little bit closer, you see where things are starting to come apart. We have beam cracking due to water seepage. You can see evidence of dry rot. The paint is starting to peel. The bolt is causing stress in that wood. This is a connection that is prone to failure because it's splitting that wood in half. And there's no waterproofing membrane. So the water, every time it rains, or if this person were to have potted plants or any type of vegetation, they're literally destroying the balcony that they're living on. And so a lot of the causations are occurring from the unit owner themselves. So a lot of the distress comes from them, because California doesn't really get a lot of rain. Most of the water that comes is coming from the occupants, from their own irrigation. So in this case, this shows you how a cantilevered balcony with no columns. In this particular project, which is in San Diego, all of these balconies are being replaced. So I'm going to go into detail in this. I have a little short clip which will explain this, but this is your typical Type 5 framing where the balcony joists extend into the floor system and are actually sistered to the existing joists. And if we have dry rot or damage out here, this gets to be a very difficult repair, because you may have to actually take this joist out all the way inside the flooring, which affects the unit owner's space. There have been some solutions that we've used where we've been able to repair this using a sister joist that goes into a certain point, but you still end up opening this area up in here, and that becomes rather expensive. We try to avoid that, But if we have a balcony that's coming apart, then, you know, what do? You have to do what you have to do. This is the same project here. You can see that some of these nails are actually pulling out. You see these gaps over here. The stucco that's cracking in the lower right is indicative of water seepage. When you see that type of cracking, that means that the water has seeped behind the stucco and there's potential dry rot. And so if we see these signals, you know, we're trained to spot these factors, then we will ask in a phase 2 inspection to remove this stucco so that we can inspect it further visually. This is another project. This is actually in Los Angeles, and this project you can see lots of damage. That you can see the wood is cracking, you can see this railing is coming apart, you can tell by the condition of the paint that the paint is peeling for many, many years, and you can see that the siding is falling to pieces. And when you get in here with a flashlight, you'll actually see that there's dry rot, there's termite damage. This particular project has a lot of issues, and a lot of work that's going to have to be spent, a lot of money that's going to have to be spent to fix this project. So what are the typical balcony issues? Well, in Southern California, the lack of waterproofing or poor quality waterproofing is definitely a number one. Poor drainage, the water's not being drained off the balcony, definitely a major factor. We see that a lot. Termite invasion, big problem in Southern California. Poor railing connections, very common, very common. And then there's always earthquake damage. We have, even with moderate earthquakes, even with a 3.8 or 4.0, it'll cause damage to these balconies. It'll cause damage to your structure. You may not think so, but a lot of that damage gets hidden. And then it all starts to come apart when you have one bad or excessive rainfall. You have one big storm and everything starts to just catapult into one big problem. And then, of course, you know, ground settlement. Ground settlement is a big problem in Southern California because many projects that were built before the 1970s, before 1971, the soil may not have been compacted, you may not have proper grading, and that will contribute also to the building movement and cause balcony issues. So this is a very, very excessive example of a project that you can see just by looking at it is about ready to go to pieces, and we have to get this repaired sooner than later. The owners here really don't have a choice on this, and you can see that the paint will tell you what's going on. Lots of evidence here of railing damage. You can see the wood is coming apart. We are also required to inspect the stairways by the balcony law, and all of these railings have to be inspected, and we have to check these rise to run ratios. So that is included in the scope of the law. So the scope of work that's normally done on a typical inspection is we'll do a field survey. We'll check the dimensions of the balcony, the span, the cantilevered areas. We'll check the railing. We'll check the heights and the spacing of the ballast to make sure they're to code. We'll do a physical test on the railing structure by applying a 100-pound weight to it and see if it's in good condition. We'll do a zip level survey. I showed you a picture of that instrument to measure the deflections as they exist. Standard 1% slope is used for the datum, and if the deflections exceed 1%, then this gives rise for concern because the movement is generally signaling a structural failure is coming. And the zip level instrument is accurate down to 1/10 of an inch. And so we'll do these non-destructive tests first to see if the balcony passes. And if it passes, then we'll issue a letter that says you're in compliance. If it doesn't, then we'll ask for a phase 2. I wanted to share this with you. This is a project that we've been working on. You can see the effect of termite damage and dry rot. And this project is in reconstruction right now. So the process, the design repair process, is one, to do a field inspection and prepare reports. That's a physical inspection. If we find damage, we define it, we explain where that damage is, We will then define the cause and the source of the damage, and that's your phase one, is to just determine if there's a problem. And if there is a problem, then we have to do either a repair or we have to do further inspection. So phase two is to actually prepare plans. So I get a lot of questions on this from homeowners, HOAs. Contractors will provide a cost estimate and a scope, and they want to just go and fix it, and they don't want to pull any permits. And I highly advise that you don't do that, because if you do it without permits, you will jeopardize your insurance coverage. You will jeopardize your ability to recover loss in the future. And you will take on the liability that if someone gets hurt because you did it without permits, because you did it without the right process, you risk the potential of being liable for those decisions. So you've got to get permits and approvals on your project. It's very important. So once you get your permits, you're now ready to proceed to construction. And a lot of homeowners are very excited to go into construction. But this is where a lot of the problems occur also. So the first thing I highly advise, my step 8, is you must pre-qualify, interview, and vet your contractor. Make sure they have all the right insurance. If your project is a big project, big is a relative term, I'm going to say, anything over 20 balconies starts to get to be pretty large. There's a lot involved there. If you're doing work that involves more than 20 balconies, I would highly advise that you consider hiring a construction manager, a professional who can guide you through this process, because it can be it will be very time consuming. It will be very labor intensive on a board member to manage this. And unless they're construction people with a construction background, they could very well easily get lost in the process. Particularly depending on the jurisdiction where you are, there are several jurisdictions that I consider to be relatively more difficult to work with than others. One is the city of Los Angeles, the city of Santa Monica, city of Long Beach, and there's a lot of other cities that I could add to that list, but those three are the ones that stick out of the crowd. But either way, you've got to have some system in place. You need to check out who you're working with, not just with the engineer, but also with the contractor. And then after you've done that and you've gotten your bids, you hire a general contractor, you put them under contract, and you go to work. And the most important thing after you start work is to maintain the quality control, the quality assurance program during the construction process. Make sure that you are monitoring your project properly with a QA/QC program. Complete all of the inspections. Obtain the permit clearances before you complete, and make sure that the contractor does what the plans say that he was supposed to do. That's very important, because if you don't do that and they complete the project and it's not done per code, it's not done per the plans, and you pay them, it's very hard to get them to come back and fix that stuff. So you want to make sure that they do what they said they were going to do, what they were paid to do. And to do that, you should have an inspector on your project, either the structural engineer of record who did the plans, or hire an independent inspector, but you need to have a third party involved to offer that quality control and quality assurance. Otherwise, again, you'll be back to where you were before you started, which is having issues, and nobody wants to be there. Age matters for sure. Buildings that were built before 1970 have obviously higher probability for damage, long-term deferred maintenance. The codes made significant changes after 1970, and that may affect your building. So anything after 1970 until 1994, there were numerous code upgrades. And also after 1994, from the Northridge earthquake, there were lots of code upgrades. So buildings that were built, I divide up structures in California, and it really applies nationwide, but mostly in California, into three
categories. There's the pre-1970, the 1970 to 1994, and then you have 94 to 2000, and then anything post-2000 usually has pretty good code provisions. Anything over pre-1960 is really kind of a wild card because that was in the day and age when there was no compaction requirements, fill slopes or unknown materials. So buildings that are older than 1960 obviously have a lot more problems because they're older. The other last item there, number 5, is do pay attention to possibility of recovery through insurance. Sometimes some of these damages may be insurable versus maintenance issues, and you may be able to actually recover money. I'm not saying you can, I'm just saying maybe, but don't exclude that option as you're going through your evaluation process. So there are different types of design solutions that we've employed. One is, of course, partial repair, which is replacing floor joists, sistering in floor joists, which involves adding new lumber to damaged lumber or just taking out the damaged lumber. There's the full replacement where we say, okay, this is just way too bad and it just needs to all come out. And then there is the possibility of mixing steel with the wood to attach it with steel plates and reinforce that wood. That's assuming that the wood is not completely deteriorated or dry rotted. So we've used all 3 of these, and sometimes we come up with even more innovative solutions. It's all about cost. I understand that money is scarce and it needs to be spent wisely. So we don't want to waste your money. We want to use it efficiently. We want to do it economically. We want to make it work for you. Understood? So we look at these 3 options to see which is the best solution for a particular project. Every project is different, and every project needs specific attention. We must also remember that Southern California is a highly seismic zone. I'm going to show you some earthquake data to give you some background. This is another reason that the balcony law has so much relevance in California. The International Building Code has 6 categories of earthquake risk. They're rated A, B, C, D, E, F, with A, B, and C being the non-seismic zones. California is broadly rated in the category as a D, which is about 80% of the state. I'm not aware of any part of California that's a B, or C. I don't think it exists. So you start from a D and you get progressively worse. I want to make it very clear that there is no current scientific process for predicting an earthquake. So anything you hear through the media or through movies or anything, it's false. No one's figured out how to predict an earthquake. The scientists have been working on this for decades, but nobody's really come up with a foolproof system. So just to be clear, I want to eliminate any fiction that's out there in your minds dealing with that topic. Los Angeles has regular earthquake activity, just like San Francisco. We probably have somewhere between 1,000 to 2,000 earthquakes a week, which are less than a magnitude 2. We have magnitude 2.5 to 4 more regularly than you would like to admit. So this is a constantly moving tectonic plate. People don't realize that, but it's highly seismically active. And it's happening all over Southern California. To give you a perspective, this is a world map showing earthquake activity across the global scale. The area that California is, which is on what's called the Ring of Fire, which circles the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean here is kind of in between the 2 sides of the paper. But you can see the magnitude of earthquakes here over the past 100 years and where they've been concentrated, where Alaska definitely gets more than its fair share, and so does Japan. But California is not too far behind, and Mexico and Latin America have definitely gotten more than their fair share. But there are many areas across the world that are subjected to earthquakes. So it is on the Ring of Fire, and the state is got thousands of faults, and I'll show you some sample pictures here in a moment of the fault lines. I share this picture with a lot of clients to show you what the active faults are just in the west side. You have the Santa Monica fault, the Hollywood fault, the Newport Inglewood fault, the Malibu Coast fault, and you have a bunch of faults which are in the ocean, and there are a bunch of smaller faults. All of these black lines up here are earthquake faults. So I've made this statement many times before that everyone in Southern California lives within 5 miles of an earthquake fault. I might go further to say that we all live within 1 mile or 2 miles of an earthquake fault, some of us, but definitely within 5 miles of an earthquake fault, for sure, no matter where you are. So it is a established reality of the situation. I live in Pasadena, and I am actually very close to the Sierra Madre Fault, so I'm also in the fault zone. There's the Verdugo Fault. And of course, if you're living anywhere in these areas, you have now something to think about. And all of these lines, the difference between the highlighted lines and the non-highlighted lines are the activity. And then the dashed means that we really don't know where that fault goes or where it ends. There's a lot of unknown faults. The Northridge earthquake occurred on an unknown fault. And these are newly drawn earthquake faults that were discovered in the last 10 years, which are in the Santa Monica and in the Santa Monica Boulevard zone in Century City. And also there's a Hollywood fault that follows Hollywood Boulevard. So why am I showing this to you? Well, because a lot of people don't take it seriously, and there are lots of people that don't have earthquake insurance, which I highly advise. I have earthquake insurance. I think you shouldn't be living in California if you don't have earthquake insurance. That's my opinion, because I saw what I've been here for almost 50 years. I've lived through at least 7 major earthquakes, and I've seen with each event what it does economically to the society. And Northridge wiped out a lot of people. So my advice to everyone in the audience is really consider getting that earthquake policy. So I spent some time to talk about insurance, which is really advice for the public to consider having not just earthquake insurance, but a fairly good coverage policy, because that is your recourse to recover damages. And I'm not saying that it will necessarily pay for damages, because sometimes the way insurance policies are written today, they may exclude certain causations. But if you don't have the insurance, then you have no basis to at least file a claim. So the first thing that I advise all property owners is hire a professional to evaluate the cause of the loss. Don't just rely on your insurance carrier. Get it done professionally, using a basis of scientific evidence, so that you're not leaving money on the table or being railroaded into accepting a no coverage decision when there actually may be coverage. Many claims go without coverage because of lack of technical investigation. That happens a lot. I've seen thousands of cases like that. So homeowner associations should seek out qualified professionals. These are called private insurance adjusters, or public insurance adjusters, actually, because they work for the public. Not the adjuster that works for the carrier, but the adjuster who works for you. I'm not saying that carriers will deliberately do this, but at least when you have a professional working on your side, you have somebody taking your interest in mind. And insurance is not cheap, and you are entitled to file a claim and get recovery if you are legally entitled to it. When we get to the reconstruction process, I would certainly, if you have a situation where you've had storm damage or balcony damage or any type of failure, is to go through what I call the ABC process here. Phase A, evaluate the possibility of a claim and prepare a set of plans by a professional engineer or architect. File a claim if you feel that if there is coverage under a policy, hire a public adjuster and get coverage. And then before you go into phase C, make sure you don't skip phase B, which is to get a set of plans done and get permits. Because if you don't have permits, I already mentioned that earlier, you put yourself at risk. Phase C is the construction phase. Hire a qualified contractor, make sure they have insurance, make sure they're bonded, make sure they have an active license. If it's a big project, get a construction manager who can help you so that you can manage your project efficiently. And don't open up a new set of claims in your construction phase. And I know I've said it before, but I'm just giving you a short list here of the pitfalls because I see this so many times where people try to cut corners and they try to get the work done without a permit, without a design professional. And again, these are the risks. Your work may be uninsurable. It will affect your future coverage. No design plans leaves you at the mercy or the whim of the general contractor because you don't have a design document to go back to. You don't have a set of specifications. You must have a legal construction contract to include permits, insurance, workers' comp, and vet the construction company prior to starting the job. Because if you don't have these items and a laborer is injured on the job, you are risking your association. You are taking on the liability of their work. And that's not a good place to be, especially in the state of California. No professional oversight leaves the HOA open to substitution of materials that may not meet the quality standards. Things can get swapped out, and that'll lead to further problems, and again, affecting your longevity of your project. So we want to look at a case study. I have renamed the association and the names involved to protect the innocent. So I call this the Sunshine HOA balcony damage case. And the Sunshine HOA has the balconies constructed in 1980, which have been falling apart for years. The HOA board member Goldilocks hires general contractor Lovely Bones, that is a relative of Goldilocks, who does piecemeal repairs. That means that they don't sign a contract for all of the balconies. They do like one balcony here and one balcony there. And this goes on for 10 years. And the cost of all these piecemeal repairs or multiple repairs still leaves the majority of the balconies still falling apart. And board member Cheap Shot decides to repair his balcony without permit documents. Goldilocks has Lovely Bones doing work without plans, permits, or specifications. So what you have is you have a lot of construction activity going on here that is uncoordinated. There's no central point of control. You don't have permits. You don't have plans. And so this is my case study. We'll discuss this briefly. I encourage you to discuss it amongst your membership, amongst your fellow. If you're taking this class with a group meaning more than 2 people, it's a great discussion point to go over with each of you. There will be questions on this in the quiz if you are taking the class for credit. So let's go to the next slide and see what the questions are and have a little discussion on this amongst yourselves. So let's look at the discussion. I would like for you to make a list of 5 mistakes that the Sunshine HOA board committed over the past 10 years. I'd like you to think about 3 liabilities the HOA board has exposed themselves to with their management decisions. Does the Sunshine board's decisions affect their insurance coverage? Explain. List 3 steps moving forward that the Sunshine board can proceed to rectify the situation. How should the board handle the individual board member with the personal relationship with the general contractor? List 3 steps. So you'll get a chance to answer this. There'll be some questions on this on your quiz, but I'll give you a few leaders on a couple of these discussion points. There's a lot of mistakes that have been made here. I'll give you at least 2, maybe 3. I'd like you to think about more. But first of all, the board has broken the rules that they should not be doing business with anyone that's a relative of a board member. That board member should exempt themselves or recuse themselves from such contractual involvements. And I know it sounds pretty basic when you read it in a case like this, but oh my goodness, it happens so often and it goes in the wrong direction. So there's definitely a conflict of interest there. And the board has taken this process of piecemealing the repairs, which really has left many other unit owners exposed. And they've essentially it looks like they've taken on the task of repairing their own units first. So tremendous amount of conflict of liability, tremendous amount of risk that those board members have encumbered upon themselves. And they've opened themselves up for a lawsuit, which the HOA membership could sue them as exploiting those positions for their own personal interest. They've opened themselves up to multiple liabilities because they haven't gotten permits. They've jeopardized their insurance for sure. They've jeopardized their coverage. They've jeopardized the insurance for the entire HOA. And so, in short, it's a big mess. So, how do you fix it? Well, for one thing, I think that the board members that broke the rules here need to be removed. And whatever process that is, I'm not a HOA attorney, so that's something you have to talk to a legal counsel on. But they need to be removed. They need to step down or be removed. And they need to bring in a new team, and preferably a construction management company who can come up with a plan. They need to come up with a budget. They need to fix the balance of the balconies. They need to fix everything, and they need to get a designer on board who can prepare a set of plans. That would be a licensed architect or a licensed engineer and a licensed general contractor to help execute the plan and avoid these kinds of personal relationship entanglements that have plagued this board. That's a short summary. I'm sure that you'll find even more nuances in this case, but this is based on a real case, by the way. This is not a fabricated case. This is coming from my own experience. I've seen this happen, and it's absolutely horrific. Another thing I wanted to talk with you about is sample size. So the Senate Bill 326 allows, and I put that in quotes, the inspector, which is me or someone else, which would be a licensed engineer or a licensed architect as per SB 326. For HOAs, contractors are not permitted to be doing the inspections. It has to be a licensed design professional. So they allow us to pick a sample size that represents a 95% confidence level for the project. No specific numbers are mentioned, but the sample size of 10 or 15% is suggested. So I've already given you some comments on this in my talk, that the 95% confidence level, which is a statistical representation that says, oh, if I take a certain sample size, I'm going to extrapolate those results to the rest of your balconies. So if you have 100 balconies and I inspect 10 of those balconies or 15 of those balconies, I'm going to extrapolate, means I'm going to assume that the other 85 balconies that I did not inspect are pretty similar to the 15 balconies that I did inspect. And I don't agree with that. That works in a different situation where if all the balconies were exposed to the same level of risk and were truly identical, then I could subscribe to that. But I can tell you that that's not the case. I've been doing this for a long time. You cannot extrapolate when it comes to balcony structures or stairway structures. So I recognize, it's important to recognize, you must understand that each balcony is mutually exclusive structure. And in my opinion, and it is my opinion, there are other engineers that will probably disagree with me. Architects may disagree with me, and that's fine. It's not appropriate in my judgment, and again, it is my opinion, my professional opinion, to extrapolate results from 10% to the remaining 90%. Because the person who's taking on that risk is me. It's the engineer or architect that's taking that risk. Now, of course, there's also risk to the HOA, because if it only takes one of those balconies or stairways to fail, and you have a major catastrophe on your hands. And so it's not worth the risk, in my judgment. It really isn't. So why take it? Do it the right way, get them all inspected, but don't do this sample size, even though the law does allow it. And there will be many inspectors, many engineers and architects that will take issue with me on this, but I'm not going to do it. So I'm just telling you that's my standard. You can decide which way you want to go with it, but I've given you my technical reasons for it, and the final call is clearly in your hands on that topic. So again, just to reemphasize, it's my opinion, it's best practice to inspect all the balcony elements, avoid taking risk of missing that one balcony that can collapse. This also applies to all the stairways, railings, and external walkways that are above 30 inches from the ground, just to solidify my point of view on this. So in conclusion, hopefully you've learned some new things out of this presentation. The points of discussion: evaluation is key and prevention is the best path. Balcony damage, coverage versus no coverage. You may have some possibility of recovering some insurance coverage on some of these if you've had damage that has occurred due to a storm event. That is an open item that requires, a claims evaluation process and hiring of a professional insurance adjuster. There are 3 phases to this process: inspection, design, and construction. I've emphasized tremendously the importance of permits, plans, specifications, and quality control. A lot of HOAs, a lot of residential unit owners don't take that too seriously sometimes. A lot of contractors skip that step, but it's very important for you as an owner. I'm speaking directly to the owners and the professional property managers that are the audience of this, and also to the general contractors, that it's important to have quality control. It's very important to have permits and plans. Also, keep the door open for possibly seeking coverage through insurance. I'm not saying that always works, but you should at least be aware of it. Track your funds. Managing board members, keep track of how you spend your money, spend it wisely, and avoid conflicts of interest. And if you have damage, if you have a claim, get it professionally evaluated and see if you have any insurance coverage. There is a short clip that I'm going to share with you right after this presentation. It'll come on in a minute, and I want to thank you kindly. And I'm always available for questions. You can get a hold of me through my email or through my assistant, Jessica. For those of you that have taken the class for credit, you can register with Jessica, my assistant, and she will get you an exam that you can pass, and then I'll get you a certificate. Those are certified through the State of California Department of Real Estate. So again, I thank you kindly for your attention on my talk. I hope you gained something positive out of this, and I look forward to work with all of you. Thank you.